religious movements occurred in medieval India. Some of these movements are called as Bhakti movement and some of these are called as Sufism or Sufi movement. In this video, I am mainly talking about the Bhakti movement. So first we have to understand the definitions of these religious movements. When it comes to these religious movements that occurred in medieval time, these are often called as sectarian or different sect. However, the concept of sectarian or sect is quite a narrow concept. And when we study these religious movements in detail, we see that these were diverse, heterogeneous, and encompass different sizes of the population. In fact, some of these movements led to the formation of full-fledged religion like Sikhism. Hence, the concept or the term sectarian does not explain these religious movements. So we can say that these were mainly some socio-religious movements, because even though the dominant theme was religion, but it also covered social and economic aspects, because these religious movements were an outcome of what was happening in the society. At this particular time, society was divided based on caste, and there was also the occupation or economic aspect associated with caste. So people were given occupation based on their caste identity. So these religious movements, in fact, were an opposition to this kind of social economic structure that was happening. So we can say in definition that Bhakti movement was, or the religious movements were not simply religious movements, but these are also socio-economic movements that actually altered the social structure in India. One concept that is closely associated with these Bhakti movements is the term Bhakti itself. The term Bhakti means single-minded devotion, and this concept is also closely associated with the concept of feudalism. In feudalism, the feudal tie bind people closely. People here are the landlord and the tenants. And in case of Bhakti movement, we see that the devotee or the worshippers are closely tied to the God. So here we see a single-minded devotion or dedication towards a group of people, towards an individual by a group of people. So this is what is very common aspect of Bhakti movement, and we see its resonance in feudalism also. The Bhakti movements were also heavily influenced by the Vedanta and the Gita. So the texts that were composed after the Vedic time, these also were interpreted by the Bhakti leaders to appeal to the society and also to reform the society. So we see the influence of the Gita on these Bhakti leaders and their teachings. By the 15th century, the Bhakti movement was divided into clearly two groups of movements. One was Shaguna and the other one was Nirguna. Shaguna means basically worshipping some deities. Nirguna means not worshipping any deity but worshipping a formless God. So in Shaguna, we see further two divisions, Shaivite, Vaishnavite, and also some who worshipped Mother Goddess. And here Goddess is basically Durga and her different avatar. Similarly, when we talk about Shaivite and Vaishnavite, they also had different avatar. So basically, worshipping some deity is Shaguna Bhakti, and not worshipping deity but worshipping a formless God is Nirguna Bhakti. And Sikhism is a good example of Nirguna Bhakti. So other common elements about these different aspects of Bhakti movement that came into existence is the use of stories, the use of storytelling in the form of either myths or legends. So different stories were created about the lives of these Bhakti leaders like Guru Nanak or even Sant Kabir, Mirabai. So these Andal and these stories were narrated amongst the worshippers even after the leaders passes away. So these kind of stories also helped in spreading the teachings of Bhakti movement or spreading the teachings of those particular leaders. And here it also set this movement apart from Vedic and Sanskritic religions. Another common component of the Bhakti movement is the use of songs and poems to narrate these stories. So there were songs and poems written, composed by these preachers also, like Andal or Mirabai. They also composed different songs and poems to narrate their devotion. So not simply the stories or the main ideas or interpretations of religion by these leaders, but also to explain their devotion to the Lord. Myths and legends were more visible in the Nirguna Bhakti traditions. In Shaguna Bhakti, we see that the concept of transmigration and rebirth was important, and other concept that was important was Varnashram Dharma. So it was believed that it is a matter of merit to be born as a human being, and one can be one can attain rebirth by as a human being by attaining a lot of punya, and one can attain a lot of punya by following the varnashram dharma or the norms of varna. So basically in Shaguna Bhakti what we see is that it was not entirely critical of varna system or even jati, the offshoot of varna system. So basically they were not very critical of the caste system, and even if they were attacking the caste system, they were not dismissing it altogether. When it comes to Nirguna Bhakti, leaders like Nanak or Kabir, they were critical of the caste system, and they were saying that they were clearly openly saying that the caste system was discriminatory. So here we see a difference or a division between these two aspects of Bhakti movement. When it comes to the method of teaching or method of preaching, satsang, pravachan, bhajan, sankirtan were used as method to spread the teachings of the bhakti leaders, and also some older forms of worship like puja and pilgrimage continued. Another distinction between the Nirguna and Shaguna Bhakti was the population that they appealed to. So in case of Nirguna Bhakti, the leaders like Kabir, Guru Nanak and Dadu appealed to the rural population in northern India. In Shaguna Bhakti, we see that the followers were mostly from urban section of the population, and they were mostly from the Brahman caste. The preachers were also mostly from the Brahman caste. So here we see a clear difference in these two beliefs in Bhakti movement. Among the Shaguna Bhakti devotees, there were worshippers of Shiva and Vishnu, and they were called as Nayanars and Alvars in Tamil Nadu. Yamunacharya and Ramanuja were two prominent leaders of the Bhakti movement in South India. They composed poems to register their devotion and descents. By the 12th century, they became quite popular in southern India and also in northern India, and also in northernmost part like in Kashmir and in eastern India, northeast. We see different religious leaders who took the ideas of bhakti and they interpreted these ideas as per the requirements of that particular society. So we see popularity of Chaitanya, Shankardev, and then Andal in South India again, Mirabai in these different parts in India. So the key points in Bhakti movement, especially in context of Nirguna and Shaguna Bhakti, are one, that Nirguna Bhakti believed in a formless God, whereas in Shaguna Bhakti we see worshipping of deities such as Vishnu, Shiva, Durga, Kali, and different avatars of Vishnu and Shiva. Some prominent leaders of Nirguna Bhakti were Guru Nanak, Kabir and Dadu Dayal, and they used hagiographies to spread the message of Bhakti. In fact, we see the composition of Adi Granth in this particular time. In Shaguna Bhakti, we see the emphasis on rebirth and Varnashram Dharma. That means they were still following the Varna norms. In Nirguna Bhakti, the followers were of different caste. They were of different economic background. In case of Shaguna Bhakti, the Brahmins were mostly the leaders as well as the followers, even though they also encompassed people from different caste and gender background. In Nirguna Bhakti, Sikhism is one of the outcomes of Nirguna Bhakti. Here we see the use of legends to create religious traditions. In case of Shaguna Bhakti, we see that Vaishnavism and Shaivism became two prominent forms of worship in this particular time. So whenever we study Bhakti movement or any other religious movements, we have to understand that these were reactionary. So these were not about following norms or following orders, but these were to bring some changes. The term movement itself encompassed change, and these religious movements that happened in medieval time, they were basically attempts to reform Hinduism, and because of these reforms in Hinduism, we also saw emergence of new religions from Hinduism like Sikhism, and they actually helped in making Hinduism a stronger religious belief. This kind of reforms or religious movements happened earlier also. In the 600 BC, we witnessed a similar sort of movement where Jainism, Buddhism emerged as alternate ways of worshipping God. And this kind of movements also happened in other religions, like I mentioned about Sufism in this video. This kind of religious movements actually helped in or helps actually in reforming religion. It can be in any religion. It helps in reforming these religious beliefs and make the society a better place for everyone.